it's a bit of a puzzle then how a society that is just the sum of individuals, if you want, then creates the whole of society again. And here it's basically this also quite famous metaphor of Adam Smith of the invisible hand, that basically decentrally organizes all of these individual self-interests into one coherent whole, yeah, such that instead of having like a top-down centralized ruler as in the feudal state of societies, it was about this invisible hand of the market, as it's still quoted today, where many atomized, decentralized decisions somehow produce this miracle of a social order that is even stable over time. Yeah? And a part of this invisible hand metaphor is a certain political program about what the state is supposed to do and not to do, which is often described by this French term laissez-faire. So let the market do what it's supposed to do, with the state taking the role of what has been described as a night watcher, or basically just a guardian in the background. There's a lot of dispute about how much state Adam Smith really wanted to have in the economy. In his book on the Wealth of Nations, if you just go through it and search for, let's say, state institutions or institutions that really depend on public investment, you will find quite many instances. So it's not the case that Adam Smith did not attribute any kind of role to the state, but I think it's fair to say that as the grandfather of economic liberalism, he saw the state as a minor figure and the invisible hand of the market as more important. So let's take a step back here and just let's realize what revolution in thinking actually this both invisible hand metaphor on the macro level, if you want, and the idea that self-interest is and perhaps even should be the driving force on the micro level was at the time of writing of Adam Smith. And I mean, a description of this historical revolution is very well summarized in Albert O. Hirschman's book, The Passion and the Interest, where he meticulously shows how over sort of the 17th, 18th century, there was a gradual reinterpretation of interest from being something bad, of being something ethically very dubious, to a very positive connotation, right, of interest as, if you want, something like the rational manager that governs passions in the psychology of human beings. So imagine human beings driven by all of these different motives, different passions, emotions that are without any limits. And Hirschman shows how then in the 18th century, when also Smith was educated and did his writings, interest suddenly became something positive. And this was already before Adam Smith, so he could build also on prior thinkers. One important prior thinker was also Manville, like a Dutch-British also political economist, who I think it was in 1726 wrote a fable of the bees, right? So a poem in which he already described this metaphor where, if you want, then private vices, so self-interested behavior, leads to public virtues. So Manville describes then like a colony of bees that thrives because every bee follows its own interest, instead of another colony of bees that goes into decline because everyone is individually virtuous, but this doesn't lead to basically a public wealth of that in that story. Okay. This figure of thought is not only applicable in the economic context. In ancient Greek, for instance, there were aristocratic competitions around organizing the public good in a Greek polis, for instance, and with the unintended consequences then that the public was thriving thanks to this private competition of aristocrats. So this is an old figure, but nowadays Adam Smith is usually cited then as the most prominent father of this figure of thought. So Adam Smith, and I mean, this is a bit of a liberal utopia also in his book, does not only think that this individual pursuit of self-gain, rational pursuit, leads to more wealth in general, but also for the many. So he has a point about like this distribution as well, this wealth in his writings. And this became, something of the stock of the liberal utopia of the 19th century as well. And that is that there's a trickling down of this wealth into all of the strata of society, such that even the laboring population in these modern societies is better off than, let's say, the upper strata of the traditional societies, with lower levels of inequalities also when compared to traditional societies. So if that wasn't enough, the liberal utopia has another sort of advantage to sell, which is also referred to as the du commerce hypothesis, which you find, I think, not only in Adam Smith's writings, but even in Kant's writing, for instance, which says that if countries engage in trade, then this has, in a way, a peacemaking influence. So they won't wage war against each other. Yeah. And I think we mentioned this du commerce hypothesis already. It is probably a good sort of stable regularity that also has exceptions. It's also a bit of a question, what is the cause and what is the effect here? But this was at least one of the elements in this package of the liberal utopia. So if you want to summarize it, it's basically if you liberate the economy, then you do not only grant the freedoms to individuals that they need just anthropologically, it also liberates them from state oppression. It produces wealth, not just for the few, but for the many, and it leads to international peace. So what else do you want? So this is somehow the impetus of this liberal utopia, which was quite dominant in the 19th century and affected all thinkers, including those that we attribute the foundation of sociology to, which is the time here when Herbert Spencer enters the picture, with the early Spencer writing around 1850, where he was still a bit of a radical. He was, for instance, also in the League in favor of land reform in Great Britain that John Stuart Mill also was a founder of. So basically a radical reform proposal of redistributing most of the very unequally distributed land in Great Britain. The later Spencer then becomes more and more conservative, and this becomes also visible a little bit in his thought. So in the reading for today, what Spencer does is he basically offers this two-stage model of 19th century society. And this is something that many of these classical sociologists we will be dealing with had. They use different terms and different, let's say, emphasis. Here is one of these models in detail. And so Spencer's sort of terms for these. The traditional society is the militant society, and industrial society is the term for the modern one. And in his book here, he distinguishes these different societies by a couple of dimensions, which I briefly wanted to present here. The first is that the militant society has a clearly different purpose. Yeah, it's basically the survival of the fittest as the goal of the society, and war being the main means, violence also being used within the society. We will see this. Whereas the industrial society's goal is just commercial progress. When we talk about this opposition, militant industrial, think about these examples listed down here. So industrial, clearest for Spencer is 19th century Britain, which he idealizes, obviously. And the examples, the negative examples here, perhaps, of these traditional and perhaps somehow outdated societies in Spencer is perhaps ancient Greeks, Sparta, tribal societies, or perhaps also one of the Britain's rivals in the 19th century, the continental Prussia. And that was known as a very militarized society. So internally, these societies, according to Spencer, look different. They have a different stratification system. In the militant society, you have the combatants as sort of the upper class. You have military ranks that structure also civil society, something also that was used actually in Prussia or also Russia in civil society. And then you have the lowest ranks, which are the laborers, who have to basically do all the work and who have to sustain, if you want, an economically idle upper class, with the upper class governing through authority.